Welcome to KC Sports Beat. I'm here with Rustin Dodd, and we're going to talk a little Kansas basketball. I'm Blair Kerkhoff of the Kansas City Star. Jayhawks are coming off of a 79-73 loss to Michigan State in the Champions Classic up in Chicago. They go to Maui for the Maui Invitational Thanksgiving week. So let's look back first, Rustin, at the Michigan State game. It was the Jayhawks' second game of the year. They'd beaten Northern Colorado in the opener pretty handily. I think it gave people a pretty good sense of this team, and I thought going in there was a pretty high confidence level for Kansas against Michigan State. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, if you watch the Michigan State game, they played well for 30 minutes. And I think it went, at least for that 30 minutes, like a lot of people maybe envisioned it going. They didn't play, great on offense, but they scored, they got some stops, and they twice built double-digit leads. They got up by 13 points in the first half, sort of let Michigan State back into it. And then we're up again by 11 with about 9 minutes to play before it just sort of kind of got away from them. They stopped playing well, and then obviously Denzel Valentine had a triple-double and kind of took over the game in the last few minutes. But I think they did the confidence level that you're talking about. I think it did kind of show up in flashes, and then it sort of disappeared too.
All right, let's take it in two parts. Let's talk about how they built the big leads. Like you said, 13 in the first half and 11 with about 9 to go, and then we'll talk about what happened in those final 9 minutes. I thought they did a great job running their high-low early on. Perry Ellis was a big factor as they built that lead. A lot of things going well. It was sort of the Kansas was playing the way that we expect this Kansas team to play in getting that in getting those double-digit leads. Is that what you saw?
Yeah, I think we've seen, and I guess this is a positive sign for Kansas, that when Perry Ellis plays against a front court that's manageable, a front court that doesn't necessarily have 6'10", 6'11", or 7 foot. He's in pretty good shape, and they were playing without Gavin Schilling, one of their starting big guys. So they were playing kind of a smaller lineup. So it was a pretty good matchup for Perry Ellis and for the Kansas front court. And I thought he played really well. I mean, he was strong, he was confident. I've been impressed with him the first couple of games. You had high expectations, obviously, but I think he's certainly lived up to those so far. Okay,
so he hits his first four or 5 shots or something. They really do come out of the gate pretty hot. I'm trying to think of the perimeter. Mason was playing well.
Yeah, and Carlton Bragg hit a couple of jumpers,
the freshman, a couple 15-footers. I thought I didn't know he had that.
Yeah,
that was impressive.
That's sort of his kind of forte. I think what he can bring to him, and what you can kind of see down the road with the talent and the skill set. But yeah, he was hitting jumpers. Frank Mason wasn't playing well. I don't think he was shooting well from the floor, but they were playing at the pace they want to play. They were pushing the ball. Devontae Graham, he's not shot the ball well, and I think a lot of people kind of point to those numbers so far and say, well, he hasn't played very well. I think he's defended pretty well, and he's been active. I think he's probably tried to do too much, especially on the offensive side, but I don't think that he's been as big of a kind of a weakness as maybe the numbers kind of point to so far. And I think they controlled the tempo. They were really turning Michigan State over, which is something Kansas hasn't done a lot traditionally the last few years, and they were definitely the better team. There were still the flaws, and I'm sure we'll get to those, but I think there was a lot of good stuff to like. And even Bill Self said after the game, this was a game that sometimes when they lose, that he has sort of different moods. And this was one of those games where he wasn't necessarily in a bad mood, or he didn't show it. It didn't seem like he was really disappointed compared to what you might have thought after losing a game like that.
Okay, so they get the I thought the first sign of trouble was Michigan State down 13, got it not close, but had whittled into it by halftime. I think it was 6 or so at halftime. But Kansas extends it out early in the second half and gets it to 11. First of all, going back to the first half, I thought there were a couple of chances for Kansas to even build on what they already had. They had some empty possessions with an 11 and 13-point lead. But anyway, they have the lead at halftime. They take Michigan's best shot. They restore the double-digit lead with about 9-10 minutes to go. And then, look, Denzel Valentine is a heck of a player, and he had the best game of his career and triple-double, second one ever against Kansas. But but Kansas on the offensive end, I thought, had some issues. And what did you see? Kind of go through the checklist of things that you saw that where Kansas was flawed coming down the stretch.
Yeah, well, I think if you just look big picture and you can kind of point back to last year, it was sort of on the offensive end the same flaws as last year. They didn't. I think they finished 13 of 33 on layups.
That's unbelievable.
And I think that's maybe a liberal definition of a layup. Maybe there's some kind of runners and some other shots in there that are counted in that. But I counted in the box score 11 missed layups in the second half. And those are primarily, it's sort of an equal opportunity missing of the layups. I mean, Landon Lucas was 1 of 6 from the floor. Or maybe 1 of 5, but he was 1 of 5 from the floor. He had 2 points, but those are all point blank shots that he's missing. Wayne Selden was not necessarily kind of plugged in. He did shoot the ball well from the outside, and he had a big three late.
I want to talk about him later.
But he was not good converting inside, and that's sort of been his consistent bugaboo in his career is getting in the lane and not being able to finish. So their guards weren't finishing inside, and there was no interior post presence to score aside from Perry Ellis. And that's sort of been the issue, even going back to last year. There's really nobody scoring opposite of Ellis, and if the guards aren't making threes, they can kind of go through some dry spells. They had, I wasn't thinking about this on Tuesday night, but if you remember last year, some of the wild swings that Kansas would have. I mean, they would have a 19-point lead and give it up, and then they would have, they would come back from, 18 or 19 down.
Yeah, exactly.
They did that last year, and I think that was sort of along the same trend. They were up, and then they sort of kind of stopped scoring for a little bit. And I guess if you want to look at it from an optimistic point of view, I think Michigan State hit their last 5 shots from the floor in the last 5 minutes, and 3 of those were three-pointers. They had a true freshman, Matt McQuaid, who made 2 threes in the final 5 minutes. I mean, they sort of made everything and made every play. And so you got to tip your cap, I guess, in some regards. But I think if you look back at the entire game, there were so many missed opportunities for Kansas, and some of the same flaws kind of popping up.
Yeah, the threes were open because Kansas had to help on Valentine.
Yeah.
That left the shooter open. Look, there are a lot of things to really break down. Let's get to those in just a moment. Hey, this is Blair Kerkhoff, and I'm here with Rustin Dodd, and we're breaking down Kansas. The Jayhawks lost in the Champions Classic to Michigan State, 79-73, a game in which they led. For about 35 minutes of the game, it seemed to me. Okay, so we're in the second half, and Kansas has the double-digit lead, and they're losing it. Michigan State's cutting into it. Denzel Valentine has the game of his life with his triple-double. But it seemed to me with him, the assists and rebounds came first. His scoring came late. A lot of his scoring. I think he had 16 points in the last.
Yeah, and I think at one point he was at about 13, 9, and 9 with about 7 or 8 minutes left. So it was
couldn't stop him.
Yeah, I mean he scored I think probably 10 points in the last 5 minutes or close to that. I mean a lot of that offense was late.
It was a great performance. Take nothing away from Valentine. It really, I think, when the college basketball season is over, it'll stand as one of the best individual performances of the year. But one of my takeaways from the game was you've said it and you've convinced me of it that right now it doesn't seem like there's a lot of difference between this year's Kansas team and last year's team. Which look. Last year's Kansas team was a Big 12 champion, and a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament is a very good team. Kelly Oubre is not part of this team. Devontae Graham's in the starting lineup, but there is no rim protector. There's no big guy to really take the pressure off of Perry Ellis and have him play kind of a little bit smaller than what he's being asked to play right now. I thought that showed up in the last few minutes of the game as Michigan State was coming back. Wayne Selden. I just don't know what to make of him right now. In the summer in Korea, South Korea was supposed to be a real kind of rejuvenation for him and the way he plays, but I thought he had a really poor game against the Spartans.
And this is something that doesn't quite show up in the box score because I mean if you look at his final line, I think he was I think it was in double figures because he ended up hitting some threes and had some free throws, but for instance, if you look at Devontae Graham, the way he played against Michigan State, he had a poor game. He was like 1 of 10. He didn't make shots. But he's active. I mean, you can kind of see him out there trying to do stuff. Wayne Selden, it just seems like he sort of disappears for stretches. Like you're not even really sure he's on the floor at times. And I don't quite, early on in his career, you can sort of, he's young, he's finding stuff out. But the first 2 games, there has been sort of that same kind of trend with him where there's stretches where he just doesn't really do much. And I think that's kind of an alarming thing. There's overreactions, especially early in the season.
Sure.
It's 2 games.
Sure.
But I do think it's something to watch with him if he's able to sort of find what he found in South Korea. I think he's 2 of 8 inside the 3-point line in 2 games so far. So not a lot of sample size, but still the same kind of issues of not being able to finish. He's shooting the ball well from 3-point range. The things he does well, he's a good outside shooter. I think if he was engaged on defense, he can be an adequate, solid defender, and he's got the body to rebound. He hasn't been doing that either. So I think if he almost focused on just those strengths, he could be a serviceable, solid player. But when he gets driving into the lane and that kind of thing, he really does kind of struggle.
I think that's a good point because he loves to drive. I mean, I think he thinks that's his game. And imagine it was when he was in high school and when he was dominating that level of an opponent. But he's not a great finisher. He just isn't. And he doesn't beat guys off the dribble. It's always contested. So often he ends up on the ground with no foul called. He doesn't shoot a lot of free throws. So Kansas really gets nothing from him going to the basket. And the other thing that I notice about him is when he doesn't use his left hand when he goes to the basket. And if he could use his use both hands when he goes to the basket, I think he'd be more successful. We just don't see that happen that often with him. It's look. Fairly or unfairly, the expectation for him is a little different too because of his recruiting ranking. He came in as a 5-star prospect. He was going to be a one-and-done guy. When he came here, he's just not that player, not that kind of player. But now, I think you make a good point where he's got to play to his strengths, and I think Kansas would be well served by identifying those strengths and having him play to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you could have. Somebody else was making this point the other day, but for instance, they have other guys that can come in and kind of be floor spacers and jump shooters, and Brandon Green and Svi Mikhailuk. But the thinking I think is that Selden brings other things. He can defend a little bit better. He's experienced. He has those things. But when he's not necessarily doing those things, then it's sort of like why what is he bringing to the table? What is he adding to the equation? And I do think it's maybe, like you said, there's a little bit of unfair expectations put on his shoulders. I don't know that he necessarily needs to be the first or second or even third best player on Kansas for them to kind of reach the ceiling of what they want to be. But the first 2 games obviously seemed like he's been a little bit lost out there.
And here's something else, and maybe this is just me, but I thought one thing that Kansas had going for it going into this season was even if the roster didn't change much, and this was even with Diallo and Bragg and Vic and the incoming class, they were going to be a year older, a year more experience. That was going to be the Kansas strength. Mason, Graham, Selden, Ellis, Traylor, all those guys, Green, Svi. And especially in the backcourt. And, I just think that a team, I don't care who your opponent is, if you've got a double-digit lead with 10 minutes to go on a neutral floor with an experienced backcourt, you don't lose that game. I mean,
I think that's dead on. There were 2 things I was thinking about coming out of that game. One was that. I mean, that's for a Kansas team with the experience that they have, and you would think that this would be the year that they would be kind of hit the ground running. They wouldn't need a lot of time to get comfortable with each other because, every year you talk about, or Bill Self talks about that, a team finding itself and all those sorts of things. Well, these guys have played together for the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of these guys, I mean, they're comfortable out there. They played 10 games last summer. You would think this would be the year that they can sort of hit the ground running a little bit. And 2, Kansas suffers from totally out of whack expectations. I mean, totally totally unfair to the rest of, maybe compared to the rest of the college basketball world. But that's sort of the way it is. And I think if you're a Kansas fan and you come into this season thinking, okay, lost in the second round the last 2 years, but this is a team that's veteran. It's got deep talent. It's got, guys that can do different things all over the floor. It's versatile. And you're thinking, okay, this is sort of going to be the team that gets back to the 3 or 4 or 5 loss season,
Right.
1 seed, conference title, Final Four contender. And I think if you have those expectations when you're losing to Michigan State in the second game of the season, it's Michigan State, so it's sort of a gut punch in terms of what you thought this team could be, and then what they show you the second game. And I will mention, I guess this was 3 years ago when they lost to Michigan State in the Champions Classic. They had that game too. I think they led at halftime.
That's right.
And that team rolled off an 18-game winning streak, right on the heels of that. So it's. It's early.
Hey, and it's Michigan State. It's Tom Izzo. They were in the Final Four last year. They're in the Final Four every other year, it seems to me. It's a great program, and I really admire Tom Izzo and Michigan State. It is a heck of a program. So yeah, maybe we can talk a lot about what happened. I think the thing that bothered me was like that game in Atlanta a couple years ago. They had the lead. They had the lead with an experienced team and couldn't hold it. And I loved what you said earlier about the wild swings that this team had last year. I remember the Utah game at Sprint Center where they led like 19 at halftime and ended up losing the lead and had to come back and win it in the end. And I didn't think this team would have that. Would be like that.
Yeah, and I think if there's, this is sort of just thinking off the top of my head, so maybe this is wrong, but. I think if there's a reason for that, it might be that they just don't have the consistent interior scoring that a normal Bill Self team has had. They didn't have it last year, and it's the same kind of personnel inside. And they want to play through their bigs. Bill Self is not going to change his general philosophy. They're going to throw it inside. And so when you come away with nothing on some of those possessions, I think you go through kind of stretches where your offense kind of struggles to score. They shot 15 threes the other night, but 3 of those were in the last 30 seconds of sort of desperation time. And, if there were a few questions that you could ask. Hunter Mickelson didn't play. He was a guy that looked pretty good in South Korea. Bill Self said, it was sort of a matchup game that Michigan State, the way they defended inside, he liked Landon Lucas in the matchup, the way he plays and is able to seal inside and sort of some inside basketball stuff. And then Brandon Green only played 9 minutes and didn't shoot. Yeah, didn't attempt a three.
He was defended well. I always, like Tom Izzo in Michigan State, you pay a lot of attention to Brandon Green. So I was following him when he was in the game, and there weren't opportunities for him to. It would have been contested threes.
Yeah, so they kind of took that away, and it's sort of interesting. People can look at the 3-point numbers and say, well, they didn't take enough threes. I think Michigan State was. They've scouted Kansas. They know what they do. And I think they were taking it away a little bit more than maybe you would think, considering people think, well, Kansas plays inside out. But I think teams understand that this team gets a lot of offense from their outside, and they were taking some of that away.
Okay, so Kansas, the season continues early next week in Maui. Kansas is a regular in Maui. Every chance they have to go to Maui, which is like every 4 years.
Every 4 years, yeah.
They're there. I actually went to I covered the 1996 Maui Invitational, the Jacques Vaughn, Rafe LaFrance, Paul Pierce team, and they rolled.
I think I read that's the only time Kansas has ever won in Maui.
It may be. I remember a couple of years later they've gotten to the final and lost.
They got to the final the last time they were there. They lost to Duke in the
really
final.
Good game, I remember. They beat UCLA in the semis and beat Duke in the final, or lost to Duke in the final. Thomas Robinson was sort of a coming out party for him. So they get Chaminade. I guess that's sort of the bonus you get for being the best rep, having the best rep going to Maui. You get Chaminade in the first game, and assuming there's no Ralph Sampson-like upset, Virginia upset by Chaminade like there was back about 25 years ago. Kansas will get to the second game, and we'll see either
UCLA or UNLV. And I think the bracket sets up pretty well for Kansas because UCLA, they suffered a loss to Monmouth the first week of the season, so I think they've got some issues going on. UNLV, Kansas is familiar with them. They played them last year at home, and they're going to make the return trip to Las Vegas next year. So that's sort of a team. They've got some talent. They Dave Rice recruits well out there, and
Right.
they've got some young talent, but it's again a team that's probably trying to sort of come together. And then on the other side of the bracket, you have Indiana, I guess, looming for a possible championship game. But I think
who else is on that side?
St. John's plays Vanderbilt, and Indiana plays
Wake Forest.
Wake Forest, yeah.
Danny
That's right.
Manning's Wake Forest club.
So I mean, I think it sets up for Kansas to not only potentially win that tournament, but also get some solid victories on their resume. Nothing be eye popping out there, but some, especially just traditional powers and some solid wins.
Okay, and just real quick, you were looking at the schedule before we started this thing. They're playing late, right? Well,
yeah, local time out there. I think they have mostly afternoon games, but then
that translates into
So I think it's going to be 8:00 Central for the first night on Monday, and then the next two nights, assuming they would win, I think they'd be 9:00 Central games.
All right, so there we go. Follow the coverage of the Jayhawks and all of college basketball in the print editions of the Kansas City Star online at kansascity.com, and follow Rustin Dodd's coverage of the Jayhawks. This is Blair Kerkhoff. Thanks for listening to the KC Sports Beat.